Let's talk about the future of DMZ and the next steps I think they should take in order to make DMZ a better overall experience. And if you're interested in more DMZ tips, tricks, and guides and other discussion videos like this, whether it be talking about the future of DMZ, updates, my opinions, make sure to sub to the channel. But if you're watching this video, I'm sure you're very aware of the things available currently in DMZ, but also just how bare bones, and obviously is in the beta, but this is a very bare bones mode, and there's a lot of things they could add to improve it. So I made a list of 6 different steps that Call of Duty can take to improve the DMZ experience, make it a little bit more hardcore, and overall just de-simplify it a little bit. I know they still want it to be a simple mode. That is what Call of Duty is at its core, is more simple for the casual player. But I do think DMZ would definitely benefit from a more hardcore experience. But kicking it off with the first step, which I think is the most logical and obvious one for them to do, which would be to introduce a bigger or more expansive stash. Now, currently in DMZ, you can stash up to 20 contraband weapons and 20 keys. And you can also exfil with a backpack, a kill streak, a self-revive, and a gas mask, which you can keep on you for your next raid. But having the ability to store extra backpack, kill streaks, self-reses, gas masks, more weapons, and more keys, I think is the next obvious step. Kill streaks might be a little bit overpowered to be able to store and stack up on, so maybe not those, but the rest of them I do think should be able to be stashed. If I load up on extra backpacks or extra self-reses, gas masks, I should be able to put these in my stash after the raid rather than them just being converted into XP. And then you can utilize them for future raids, deciding whether or not you want to go into your raid with a small backpack, a medium backpack, a large backpack, or even they add bigger versions or smaller versions of backpacks to the game, as well as the ability to just increase your overall contraband weapon stash as well as your key stash, increasing that from 20 to, let's say, maybe 30, 40, 50 and above. And also the ability to stash and save dog tags would be a super cool feature for DMZ, whether it be to sell for cash at traders, which we will talk about in a minute, or to just place it somewhere where you can kind of see how many operators you kills you have in DMZ. Obviously they could just add a stats section, but we'll see when that ends up coming out. I think the next step for DMZ, another easy one that they could add, which I actually don't think they will add this, is the ability to loot and add attachments to your contraband weapons. The reason I say they probably won't do this is because, you know, at its core, Call of Duty wants to make money, and being able to sell you bundles, which you then can use and bring in your insured weapon slot, is kind of one of the main drivers. If you're a DMZ player, and let's say you don't play Warzone and you don't play multiplayer, you're pretty much only going to buy bundles if you can use them in your insured weapon slot, right? Because you don't really use insured weapons as often as maybe you might use a contraband weapon in DMZ. So if you could fully customize contraband weapons, then it would make the insured slot a little bit less valuable, which means they'd sell less bundles. So I don't think they would add this. But having the ability to find attachments on the map, add and take off attachments from your contraband weapons would make it a little bit more hardcore, give you a little bit more customability, and also just kind of give you new things to loot and add that you can stash, which would be the attachments. Now, as we move into 3 through 6, my next steps, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated for DMZ, and I'd be interested to see how much of this they would actually add, because as I said, Call of Duty kind of thrives on that casual, more simplified player base. But I do think for the third step, you know, being able to loot and stash items and cash for further use, being able to store your cash in your stash, that's kind of a little bit of it's a tongue twisting rhyme there, being able to store cash and use it on things like increasing your stash size, buying attachments, buying keys from market, which we will also talk about in a minute. I think all that is a next logical step, rather than just exfilling all your cash going towards your insured weapon slot as well as XP. Being able to store your cash and use it for further use would be pretty cool. Also, the ability to stash items in the game, whether it be gas cans, gold bars, GPUs, all those sorts of things that you can find in the game, and keeping them for further use, whether it be kind of following the Tarkov hideout feature, which I don't think they'll do, because I don't think Call of Duty wants to get that, you know, in-depth and complicated with DMZ, or it could be something like using it to trade for cosmetics or DMZ exclusive items and contraband weapons. Having the ability to, let's say, take gold bars out of the DMZ, bring them to your stash, and maybe sell them to traders for money, or even, let's say, they add in DMZ exclusive cosmetics and items that you can unlock, where, let's say, there's an operator skin or a blueprint or a calling card that you have to trade in 5 gold bars for. That could be a kind of system where it makes it a little bit more rewarding and makes these items have a little bit more value if they don't want to go with some sort of similar Tarkov hideout feature. I think it would be super cool to kind of have a cosmetic cosmetic store where you have some cool items. Obviously, it's not going to be as cool as the bundles they sell for money in the store, but even simple things like calling cards, emblems, weapon charms that you could sell or trade in things like gold bars, GPUs, and other items, 100 cans of toothpaste that you find in DMZ for a calling card, things like that, just to give the looting a little bit more priority and a little bit more influence for you wanting to do that. Step number 4 in my DMZ next steps is adding a marketplace or a trading system. In games like This Cycle or Escape from Tarkov, there are traders. In Tarkov, you know, there is a flea market where you can buy and sell to AI traders, as well as you can buy and sell to other players in game. Of course, you know, being able to buy and sell means the items and things have to have some sort of use or value in game. So of course, the things I mentioned before would have to come before this marketplace. But I do think this is pretty cool. Having the ability to buy, sell, trade things on a market, I think specifically keys would make a ton of sense to add to DMZ. Obviously, keys are probably the most valuable things in the game because, you know, using keys to get into strongholds and fortresses is pretty much the best way to get awesome loot, and also adds a bit of depth, a bit of more of an experience to the game. So having the ability to, let's say, you know, I have the Crane control room key, I don't need it, but I know people do need it for their faction mission. You can put it up on the marketplace and people can buy it or they can trade for it from you. I think that would be really cool, and I think that makes a ton of sense because as of right now, the only way to get keys is to loot them yourself or drop into the DMZ with a friend and have them, you know, drop the key to you. Step number 5 would be to add some sort of HQ headquarters to DMZ. Now, I actually saw Player 2. You can check out his channel. He makes a ton of DMZ content that's really good, but he talked about this in one of his videos about adding something similar to the headquarters from World War II into DMZ. And I think this is a really good idea and can be used as something like the hideout from Tarkov, but also can be used as a social feature for DMZ. Not only could this have an area where, let's say, you use items to upgrade your headquarters and kind of give some value to items you can loot in DMZ, but also could be somewhere you can show off your cosmetics and loadouts, talk with other players, and maybe even squad up with other players. The HQ in World War II I thought was a super awesome feature. It gave, you know, a bit more of a social feature to World War II, to Call of Duty, and I think it's something that players did really enjoy. But also, you know, there was plenty of problems with the headquarters in World War II, which maybe they don't feel like is worth all the issues that they had to go through with fixing that. But I do think adding some sort of headquarters hideout style thing into DMZ would just give it a bit more complexity, but also not being too complex. And lastly, my 6th step for DMZ would be to add weather and a day-night feature into the maps. Having, you know, different weather, whether it be a storm, whether it just, you know, be foggy, day-night, obviously, you know, whether, you know, the sun being up or the sun being down, so it's dark out. This changes the dynamic of the map and also changes your gameplay. If you've ever played Tarkov, where, you know, you have your day-night cycle, if you do a night raid, you need to go in with like night vision goggles in order to see, or else it'll be completely dark and you'll be at a disadvantage to other players that may be using things like night vision goggles. But I think having the ability to, you know, go into a night version of the map, or if there's storms on the map, just gives that more variety to the gameplay, because currently you drop into Al Mazrah, the map is the exact same every single time. So I think adding night or, you know, weather cycles sort of changes it. So even though, let's say, we just have Al Mazrah as the sole, you know, main map for DMZ, having these different weather cycles or day-night cycles would make the game a little bit more different. So it might not be a totally new map, but at least it wouldn't be the exact same experience every time. So this would also add more use for flashlights, which you can add onto your guns as an attachment, or things like night vision goggles, which they would have to add. But weather could also be really cool at adding a different experience. You know, having things like rain or storms would make the game more intense, and you could even add it to the point where it actually can hurt the player via, you know, something like a lightning strike or things similar to that. I believe they also talked about a sandstorm in DMZ way back in one of their blog posts. So adding things like that, which can actually, you know, hinder the player's visibility or actually hurt them and take down their health, could be pretty cool. I don't think you should die to a lightning strike, because obviously that's something totally random that you can't control unless they add an item you need to bring in to stop lightning strikes, that sort of deal. I do think having this sort of thing would add a difference in the gameplay, would change up the experience, and would also make it so they don't need to release new maps super often in DMZ, because this would change the gameplay enough. But this is just 6 different ways I think they could change DMZ and make it a bit more interesting, a bit more complex, but not too complex, because as I've said a ton of times in this video, Call of Duty wants to be simple. They want to take that simple area of this, you know, of this market of the first person shooter and now the looter shooter genres, and, you know, they target casual players. So of course Call of Duty is not going to go for some super intense, in-depth hardcore experience, but DMZ at its core is supposed to be more hardcore mode, and I think adding things like this would actually help. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Do you think they should add anything like this? What did I not mention that maybe you think they should add into DMZ? Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Drop a like and sub to the channel if you did, and I will see you all in the next one.